There you go. I do believe that we're now live. So I would like to introduce the next session, which will focus on evaluating academic research and translating it into smart technology for the factory floor. So our presenter is David Corliss. He's a lead data scientist, business analytics, information and communication technology for Stellantis. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here. Let me go to my presentation and we will start out. Can everyone see the presentation? A little bit of an introduction of myself and Ann Dwyer, my coworker, leads one of the groups on my analytic team, and go forward from here. Is this the right one? Might not have PowerPoint. This is the one I want to have. There we are. No. I don't want that one. I want the PowerPoint. Here's our background. So we're going to be talking about evaluating academic research, getting it onto the factory floor. First, we're going to look at modeling workflows and challenges, the sort of things we see on the factory floor. We're going to understand how they work and how they can be improved. When we find the improvements that need to be made, we're going to be looking at how to find the academic papers, find the academic research. And let me mention this, it says academic, but this isn't only universities. Sometimes it's government research labs and other independent organizations. It's all in the category of academics here. We're going to talk about how to search for the best research that will help you deliver on what you need to be doing. Once we have that large group of papers, we're going to be looking at applicability, find out which ones are going to apply, find out which ones are going to be the right ones for what we're trying to do, the problems we're trying to solve. And then we'll talk about, okay, now that we've got that, okay, we've got something published in a journal, how do we turn that into a solution? So we have a series of steps. The first step is to understand the process we're looking at and to find the gaps. The second step in the academic to industry pipeline is to search for academic papers that might address the gap. We're going to winnow those down, and then we're going to use the right ones to develop a solution. And then we'll give a summary at the end. So when we look at how something happens in developing an analysis, first we're going to be collecting information. The technical term here is feature generation. We're going to find the things that matter the most. Those are the features. We're going to create a model of how things ought to work. We're going to test that model. We're going to see how well it works. Yes.
David, sorry to interrupt you. I do apologise. We can't see your presentation at the moment. Do you know that it's not being shared?
No, let me see. What do I need to do to share it properly? I'm on screen.
There's a screen share button on the bottom of the toolbar next to the microphone and camera mic.
Sorry, and I hadn't clicked that. There we are. Share. Thank you very much for mentioning, Chris. Let's go back to... And now can people see something that's called modeling workflow?
That's perfect. Thanks, David.
Yeah. That's what we need. Thank you very much. It's always hard for me to see what the other people are seeing. Thank you very much for the feedback. So we have those series of steps. We're going to collect some information. We're going to generate these things called features. The features are the things that make a difference in the process. We're going to run a test, and we're going to evaluate how well that works. But what if what we're doing are theoretical way of describing this process, that could be a statistical model, that could be a manufacturing process. In smart manufacturing, they really, really come together where the analytics are driving the end result. That's what makes the manufacturing smart. But what happens when that machine learning AI model, what if it's not optimal? Well, as Henry Ford said a century ago, there is nothing that cannot be improved. Anything can be improved. And so we tend to look for what are the problems, what are the gaps. But we can be thinking about also How do we make things simply work better? Because anything can be improved. Here are some of the things that come up when we talk about a process that isn't working as well as it might. False positives, false negatives. We're finding we've got a process that's looking for defects, and we're picking up things that are supposed to be defects. Well, maybe some of the defects slip through. That's a false negative. Maybe some of the defects in the manufacturing process, we find them as defects, but it turns out that they're not actually a problem, that they're not out of spec. So there's always going to be some when we use an analytic process to look at how well the process is working. We want to see if something is being manufactured within specifications. We're going to pick up a few things that are out of specifications, but we miss them. Those are false negatives. We're going to find things that we say, oh, we have to look into this further. We think there's a problem here. We look further and it's not a problem. Those are the false positives. We want to reduce those numbers so that when we find a defect, we can pull it off the line, do any rework that needs to be done. When we say something is good, we know it really is good. Those numbers are never perfect. They can always be improved. Sometimes we've got prediction accuracy. We're trying to predict some result in a process, and accuracy can always get higher. This is very often a problem. Model run time is too long. We can use AI, we can use machine learning, and the information comes too late. There's an old joke. It started in statistics, and now it's in AI, that we can perfectly predict tomorrow's weather, but the algorithm takes 3 days to run. Information delivered after the decision is made, after the part has moved on down the line, after it has left the plant and has been stamped with the seal of approval, information received after the decision is made is worthless. And so one of the reasons why we have imperfect models is imperfect analysis is sometimes it just takes too long to run the AI to get the answer we need. We need to find a better way to run it in a shorter period of time that fits within our manufacturing requirements. Model accuracy varies over time. That's the official title. Usually what it is that models get worse over time. We've got some AI, we've got some smart manufacturing process, but over time, it's not as good as it used to be. They tend to degrade over time. You know, the way we build almost all models, we're going to look at past performance, past results, past situations, and predict the future. Well, as we go further and further into the future, things are going to change a little bit. And because of that, the model accuracy, the intelligence we get from AI, from machine learning, we're going to find that the results of those predictions, they're going to tend to be not as good over time. One important metric in this area is to look at the AI we're using and look at the amount of time it takes to develop a new model, a new AI, a new machine learning process. Look at how long it will take and the investment that requires, and then look at the amount of improvement we get from rebuilding the model. When we constantly monitor the performance of the AI, it's not something like, oh, we bought the system, we put it online, goodbye. It's something that has to be constantly monitored. And when we see performance degrade over time, we'll get to a certain threshold. The threshold should be put in advance. So this is when we need to know that we have to go out and get new research and put it on the line, develop it and put it on the manufacturing floor. We can tell it's time to do that when we have a preset level. When the performance drops below that level, it now becomes profitable to make the investment to rebuild the AI, to bring it back above the line far enough that there's a positive return on investment. Sometimes the things we want to focus on, they can change over time. For example, one particular smart manufacturing process might be particularly targeted at reducing the amount of time it takes to do a manufacturing operation, or it might be particularly focused on, let's say, quality, or it might be particularly focused on minimizing cost. Usually these different things that we want to optimize in manufacturing, they militate against one another. And so when the direction from the corner office, from the executive suite, when the business rules change, now we're going to need new AI to match the new business rules. If we go from we're going to minimize time, well, that's going to be more expensive. If we're going to work on minimizing costs, it might take more time. And so it is time to change the AI, to do research, to get a new process when the business rules change, and we'll need to change the machine learning and the AI to catch up with the new focus, the new direction that's being set at an executive level. So we get design requirements, we have analytic results, we have what we need to perform, what we need to produce, and it's more than just, oh, we're going to make this part, or we're going to make this final article which comes out of the manufacturing floor. The design requirements also include time, it includes cost, it includes a number of other features. It could be, after it's gone out, it maybe we're having a problem with dunnage and there's been damage in shipping. There are many, many different kinds of design requirements. There's a gap between what we intend to have and what the AI is producing as an analytic result. So what we're going to do is first study what the difference is. Now, I talked about monitoring. What that means is gap isn't something we do once. Gap analysis, that difference between the ideal production and what we're actually producing, that difference is constantly studied and monitored. And at a certain point, we're going to find that there's a gap between, a large gap, large enough to take action on, a gap between what we need to have happen and what the AI is delivering at the end of the day. When we can analyze to find out what the difference is it a weakness in prediction? Are we supposed to predict a particular outcome and it doesn't do it very often? Is it a quality problem? Are we spending a lot of time chasing quality problems in things that really don't need to be reworked? Those are the false positives. Or are we having a quality problem and that bad parts are getting out of the plant? Those are the false negatives. We can identify what the gap is first, and then we can work on studying what the AI is needed to fill that gap. When we have a clear understanding of that gap between what we need to perform, we want to quantify this. We want to have specific directions. We need AI to do item, item, item. So much. We're all familiar when we're setting our goals for our performance for the year to use SMART metrics. AI can also be evaluated using these SMART metrics, that it's time-bound, it's applicable, it's all of the components that go into SMART metrics. They can be used to look at processes on the manufacturing floor and find those gaps between the ideal situation and what we actually have. When we evaluate with those SMART metrics, what we get is a description of the outside research that's needed to fill the gap. Once we have an understanding of what that gap is, then we can start searching academic papers for ideas to fix the gap. For example, give you a really good example. This is a story that's taught by a guy named Rick DeVoe. He's a professor at Williams. He does some consulting on the side. Very, very well-known, very distinguished writer and speaker. He was working with a group of folks that were making aluminum ingots, very, very large ingots. Now, these ingots were not ingots to be sent off somewhere else and melted down, but rather they were being used for airplane parts. And so the block itself was the raw material, and this would then go to another location and they would be machined. It was reductive manufacturing. They would take away all the parts that isn't engine cowling or some other part of an airplane. And so the block itself had to be solid. So the company was in business of manufacturing these large aluminum chunks without any gaps or cracks or bubbles or anything. And then a subsequent step would actually a different company. This company just produced the aluminum blocks, and then they would be machined down into whatever shape was needed. Well, they were having a problem that they were having cracks develop, and cracks are a real big deal because it's supposed to all be one piece, and cracks above a certain size would mean the part would fail quality inspection. So in this case, they knew what the problem was. They knew what qualified as a problem. They knew the problem was cracks. Cracks above a certain size made the part unacceptable, the part with the entire aluminum block. They had specifications as to what the maximum allowable crack size was. And so they found the percentage. We found these so many percent of the time. We're losing money. This is unfortunately, rework in this case means you start over. You have to rework is not you fix. You can't fix an aluminum. Apparently, so I'm told you can't fix an aluminum block once it's out of the plant and has a crack in it. You basically melt it down and make a new aluminum block. And so rework was very, very expensive. It basically meant you had to start the whole thing over, the manufacturing process all over again. So they were able to find that gap, and then they began to look for research that would fill that gap. Now, the first thing they did was look for is to gain access to academic research. This is one area where sometimes companies can be, a manufacturing operation can be a little weak, that they don't have access to academic research. They may not have people who read the journals. They may not get the journals at all. And one way to address this access issue is to work with partners who are in the university or government or independent lab research setting. Building those relationships gives access to the kind of research that's needed to solve the problem. In this case, this particular company reached out to Dr. DeVoe at Williams and built that relationship, and then DeVoe was able to bring in the right kind of research that was needed to fill the problem. Having connections with university research departments, with government labs, with independent research organizations can be tremendously helpful in just finding where to start. So, to search for papers, we're going to look for, basically do a text search. We're going to look for keywords. We're going to look for things that are recent. Remember that, a lot of the technology we use, it changes so very, very quickly. The analogy I like to give with that, the description I like to give is, think about how you did, doesn't matter what you're doing. It could be manufacturing. It could be hiring people. It could be a lot of different things that use technology. It could be how you run your desktop. Think about the technology you were using 5 years ago. It might be the same company. It might be the same product. But think about the state of the art 5 years ago. Would you still buy that product today if it performed like it did 5 years ago? I don't think so. Technology has a shelf life of about 5 years, and everything has to be constantly reinvented. And so when you look for academic research, the same is true. You find this great paper that seems to promise the sun and the moon and the stars is from 2002. There's probably something a whole lot better, a whole lot more recent. And so we'll want to keep in mind to look for the most recent papers that seem to apply. And very often, something that has to be tailored a little bit to fit your particular situation, but it came out in the last couple of years, is often going to be better research than something that looks like it's a perfect fit, but it's getting long in the tooth. It's getting a few years old. It's 4, 5, 6 years old or more. Very often research that is maybe doesn't seem like it is exact. It's going to have to be shaped or reshaped a little bit to fit your situation, but it's recent in the last 2 years is often going to be the best research to solve your problem. You want to evaluate your resource. a lot of academic papers, I think a lot of us have seen, they're hard to translate to the factory floor. We'll want to have things that talk about real world situations. And when we read through the paper, we're going to be looking through, is this something that can be easily applied? Does it come up with some theoretical results? Does it have a very, very broad discussion? Or is there a section in this research that says, okay, now that we've had these conclusions, what does this look like in application? So we'll need to find, as we read through the paper, look for paper that have that applied section to it. And then that will tell us where we can begin to apply it to the workflow. So we're going to look at searching for papers. Formulate your problems in terms of search terms, in terms of words, and be specific. When I say be specific as possible, what we're really thinking about is keywords. We don't want to throw at a search engine a whole lot of language, but more importantly, to find the most different, the most distinct words. Now, for example, with the aluminum block manufacturing that Dick DeVoe did, aluminum, ingot, crack. 3 search words. The fewest search words that focus in on your particular problem. Be specific. Then, when you look at the search result, don't just jump on the papers. Look at the top search results. Look at the kinds of research papers that you're getting. And it will help you make your search work better. If you do a search and you get 10 citations for the same paper, or you get a whole lot of things that were written 15 years ago, within the search, find a couple of papers that seem to be a good fit and then refine your search terms. So you're going to do a research, search a second time. You're going to look at your top scores, the top winning papers. Have a look at the abstract or the first few words in the search engine and get an idea as to what they're about. And then you can do a second search to get a wider number of people working in the particular area you're concerned about. So after you get the first search, look at the best papers and then tweak your search, do it a second time based on the kind of papers you get from the best papers from the first search. Citation, peer review, age, not relevant in this type of search. In the initial search, but do watch out for age. We're not so much interested, though, in citations and peer review. It could be something that's, published by an independent organization. A lot of independent labs and research organizations, they're not going to publish in journals. It doesn't have to be in journals. You don't have to say, oh, this is a good paper because it was cited, 250 times. But we're going to be looking for the things that have the best fit and preferably something fairly recent. To evaluate the resource, read through the introduction. Get an idea as to what the general paper is about. We're going to look at the graphs. Are they explained well? This is going to help us understand to see if this is something we can apply. So when we look at, start with really all treat a paper at a first glance, first read the abstract or the introduction at the top, and then look at the pictures and look at the explanations. If you understand what's going on here, if there's a lot of technical language you don't understand, it's going to be hard to apply this. You might find some other paper that has similar content, but is much easier to understand and much easier to apply. That's the next step. Skim through the paper to see if the solution details are included and explained. Okay, we found this result, but how did we get there? And how do we apply that solution in a real-world situation? We're going to then check to see how that solution was tested. Is this one person's opinion? Did they use a pilot program? How did they test to see if that solution was the best solution? Now, back to the example of the aluminum ingots. The person did some research and initial review of their quality numbers. He looked at the different kinds of ingots. They're not all pure aluminum. They also had some alloys. In fact, they're mostly alloys. And he looked at the crack that we're developing and he came to the conclusion that the cracks were developing in the aluminum when there were alloys. And he told that to his customer, and they said, "We know that." So he had come up with a result that was something that they already understood and needed to go a step further. At the same time, while that might seem uncomfortable, yeah, we know it's the ingots with alloys, but at the same time, this is an important step. It shows the person's on the right track. It shows that the person understands the problem and is working on a solution to it. It's practical. It's something that can be applied. It found a particular set that was validated by the customer. So at an initial look, these are the things that we thought were a problem. Yes, those are the ones that are a problem. Now, how do we fix it? So that explanation of how it was tested and evaluated, in this particular case, in the aluminum ingot case, the research was checked against people working in the company that said, basically validated the initial results, and then they were able to start a deeper dive. So here's an example of another paper. This is a machine learning process. This is something called bagging predictors. It's written by Leo Breiman. This is an older paper, but this is something that has become has been widely used in machine learning ever since it was first written. This is a landmark paper. So let's have a look at Breiman's paper. If you look at the first sentence, a learning set consists of data, and it gives a mathematical equation about what goes in, where Y's are either class labels or a numerical response. If you don't understand what this sentence it means, then you want to find someone who's used to working in machine learning. For a lot of people in machine learning, this is going to be very, very familiar language. We're going to read through the introductions. We're going to look at these are the methods that are currently being applied. The introduction will also describe what's new. So we want to look at, will this technology solve our problem? Remember the gap? We had the ideal situation, we had the actual manufacturing performance, and what was the difference between the two? We found that gap. Look at the paper, read the introduction, talks about what the paper does new for the first time. Does that address our particular problem? If not, move on to another paper. Look at the results and the methods section. This isn't always very well described. If you don't have a detailed description of this is what we did to solve the problem, move on to another paper. We want to make sure that there's enough language in that. So if you're doing machine learning, we can make a code change or develop new code. Can it be written in the language for the system we're using? Are you using, Python or R or many other systems, TensorFlow? Are there enough details so that you can take the kind of solution out of the paper and get them working on your plant floor? So here's the description in that particular paper. It says, we're going to take some data. We're going to randomly divide it into a test data set and a learning data set so we can use machine learning to figure out how to do this problem. We're going to use a classification tree. That's a machine learning method. We're going to use bootstrapping. That's a statistical method that's widely used in machine learning and AI. It means take something that's very, very weak in its prediction, but do it many, many times, and the collection, the large number of weak predictors put together, that's what this thing bagging is all about, and it makes for a stronger prediction. So the purpose of this paper is to make predictions work better. If you're trying to make a better prediction, this paper is your answer. If that isn't the problem you're trying to solve, you might want to move on to a better paper. So when we look at developing a solution, we're going to see two sides of things. We're going to see an initial research paper and then the process to test it out. This is how we're going to find out if this thing might solve our problem. We're going to apply this solution to an open source data set. If we're in automotive manufacturing, one of the things that I found very, very useful in automotive quality is NHTSA data. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has publicly available data on the complaints they received. It's all manufacturers, because all manufacturers, are mentioned in the report to NHTSA. You can download it. Remember, guys, this is a federal organization. It's being paid for with all of our tax dollars. Frankly, we own these data. And so we can use the NHTSA data. Maybe it's some other problem you're trying to solve, but you want to find out, is your solution working? Try a small test. Try it out on, if it's an automotive quality question, you can use the NHTSA data. There are other data sets. If you're working with finding a logistics solution, there's something called the airline data set that talks about whether or not planes arrived on time or late. It's a really big data set, but it's very, very often used. If you're looking at finding better time series solutions, how things change over time, there's the so-called milk data set. We looked at data from a dairy farm, and is very, very widely on a dairy farm over a number of years, and you want to be able to predict the trend. So we can get these open source data sets and use it on a little test. We don't want to bet the farm, we don't want to bet the factory output on something that hasn't been tested properly. So take the method in the research paper that we found, we can apply it to a small open source data set, and if we can get it to work, if it seems to have the kind of performance we want, then we can add it to our analytics stable. We can add it to the machine learning and AI processes, set of skills, tools in the toolbox that we have, and use it apply it to our own in-house data set. So it's a series of 3 steps. First, look at the research paper. Then we're going to try out a small test. Then we're going to try it on an in-house data, and then we can develop a new solution from there.
David, just a quick time check.
Yep.
We started late because of the technical issues. We are running a little bit over, so probably got about 3 or 4 minutes left.
Sure. Let me skip this example, and we just have one more example, and we'll give the summary. Academic papers. They're a great source of new ideas. Start having a look. Find someone in your R&D department that can look at the research and find the final piece of research that can apply to your situation. Open source papers are fairly easy to find. There's a lot of open source research coming from major companies, but then they open source their research. So remember to go look for machine learning and AI processes that have been developed by Google and other major players. Google has open sourced most of the text analytics tools that are being used, widely used today. Finding a solution, do a quick test, use the papers that have a good level of detail of how the process works, and then develop your own process to test those papers to see if they can be pulled through into innovation on the manufacturing floor. Time for questions.
Thank you very much, David. I think we're just about up for time. I don't see any questions in the slot there.
Okay.
Apologies for coming live there, and I hope I didn't put you off. Obviously, you've got a schedule to keep. So what I would suggest is, David, are you sticking on the platform for
I am sticking on the platform, and there also is my email address. So email me, but I'm going to stay here.
Perfect. So we'll move on to the next session in a moment, but then we have a short break. There's also a networking opportunity later on throughout the day as well. So I will remind everyone there's an opportunity for messaging one another. So, if you message David, you got any questions, you can either chat directly that way. You can go meet at a table and talk face to face. Like you said, there's an email address there as well. So I would encourage you to continue networking. But David, thank you very much. Fantastic presentation. Really appreciate it. And we'll move on to the next session. So thank you very much for that.